After returning from the conference, the main character's wife, Sally, begins to behave strangely. Suspicions lead to shocking discoveries. Monstrous details of what his wife was doing are revealed. A dangerous game begins.
A wave of curiosity swept over Seattle on Saturday. This might sound dramatic, but it's an accurate way to describe the series of events that changed my life. It all started when I decided to explore how artificial intelligence could help optimize various aspects of daily life, even the ones we rarely think about in technical terms. Let me clarify. This isn't about creating robots for companionship or anything sensational. Instead, it's about applying innovative technology to better understand human interaction and behavior. Humans have always used tools to enhance their lives, from ancient carvings and statues to modern applications of AI. This project was simply an extension of that ongoing pursuit. My relationship with my wife has always been wonderful. However, like many long-term couples, we noticed that as life became busier, we had less time for shared moments of intimacy and connection. I decided to apply my background in technology to explore how I could better align with her mood and timing, creating more opportunities for meaningful interaction. To achieve this, I turned to a project I had been developing, a high-tech electronic nose, or Enos. This device, designed to analyze airborne compounds in real time, had been initially intended for applications like detecting spoilage in groceries or enhancing airport security screenings. However, I realized its potential for understanding more subtle aspects of daily life, like emotions or changes in routine. The Enos works by using an array of sensors combined with an advanced AI backend. It can recognize complex scent profiles, much like a musician interprets a sheet of music. Over the past year, I had trained the device to monitor the scent markers of various animals, collaborating with veterinary researchers to understand the natural cycles of behavior in domestic species. Once I saw how effective the system was at identifying patterns, I began to wonder if it could also provide insights into the more nuanced aspects of human behavior. With my wife's knowledge and consent, I installed discrete sensors in our shared spaces to passively collect data about our environment. The goal was to understand how external factors like stress, diet, and daily activities influenced mood and behavior. The AI backend then correlated these insights with patterns of positivity and connection in our relationship. Over several months, the data revealed fascinating insights. For instance, it showed how subtle changes in our daily routines, like taking time to relax after work, significantly impacted our overall happiness and quality time together. The device also helped me identify activities and moments that brought us closer, allowing me to prioritize them more intentionally. The results were transformative. By better understanding the natural rhythms of our shared lives, I was able to create more opportunities for meaningful interactions and strengthen our bond. This wasn't just a win for technology, but also for our relationship. Beyond improving our personal lives, the potential applications for this type of technology are vast. From enhancing workplace collaboration to offering new tools for healthcare providers, understanding the interplay of environment, behavior, and emotions could revolutionize how we approach well-being. While the story started as a personal experiment, it ultimately became a lesson in how technology can serve as a tool for connection and empathy. Sometimes, innovation isn't about creating something entirely new, but finding better ways to understand and celebrate the relationships we already cherish. After 5 joyful years, our marriage encountered a significant hurdle a month ago. Sally had just returned from a week attending an internal medicine conference in Chicago. Typically, she came back feeling tired but content, welcoming me with a heartfelt hug and an excited smile. During the drive home from SeaTac, she would recount her meeting experiences and share some interesting anecdotes from her fellow physicians. I would update her on happenings at home, and we would laugh and converse pleasantly until we arrived. This time was different. When I met her at baggage claim, Sally seemed unusually reserved. Instead of our usual warm embrace, she gave me a quick, distracted hug before hurrying to collect her luggage. Once she found her bag, we went to the car and drove home in relative silence. "Sweetie, is everything okay?" I asked. "What do you mean?" she replied. "You seem a bit off," I said gently. She sighed and said, "I guess I'm just tired." It was a long meeting and a bumpy flight back. A good night's sleep should help. I tried to lighten the mood. "I'm sure we'll find something to cheer you up once we're home." "Honey, I'm really exhausted," she said, sounding drained. Understanding her need for rest, I decided not to press further. After we arrived home, I offered to help her relax in any way I could, but she declined, saying she just needed some sleep. She went to the bedroom alone. I heard the shower running briefly, and then everything was quiet upstairs. Later that evening, I couldn't sleep and went to my office downstairs to catch up on some work. As part of my usual pre-bedtime routine, I checked emails and reviewed some data logs from a project I'd been working on. While reviewing the data, I came across an anomaly that I couldn't immediately explain. It was unusual enough to raise questions in my mind, and I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that something was amiss. As I reflected on the events of the day and Sally's unusual demeanor, I realized I needed more clarity about what was going on. I resolved to have an open and honest conversation with her the next day, hoping to better understand what might be troubling her. I couldn't quickly drift off to sleep that evening. Frustrated with the internet, I turned to our liquor cabinet instead. After downing several shots of writer's tears, I finally managed to slip into a restless slumber. By Sunday morning, I awoke feeling utterly miserable, reminiscent of W.C. Field's description of a hangover. "I feel like the Russian army marched through my mouth in their stocking feet." It was evident that some antagonistic force had been at work while I slept. I deliberately avoided breathing near the electronic nose sensor array, knowing it couldn't handle any additional strain right now. My online searches from the previous night yielded nothing useful. So, I acted as if everything was normal. My wife seemed to be following the same approach. We silently went through breakfast and remained mostly quiet throughout the weekend. Naturally inclined to solve problems, I immediately tackled my primary concern. Was Sally being unfaithful? I contacted a few private investigators, but was shocked by their fees. Instead, I purchased a GPS tracker from Amazon and had it delivered overnight to our home. It was simple to attach to Sally's car, and I monitored her movements for the next week using a smartphone app. I also had an initial consultation with a lawyer who provided a bleak outlook on the divorce process and outlined steps to separate our finances if needed. The week was long. Both Sally and I worked during the day and communicated little in the evenings. There was absolutely no intimacy. Then, during our Friday breakfast, Sally mentioned she would be working an additional evening call shift. I frowned at the announcement. "Why are you working late tonight? I thought your on-call shift wasn't until next week." She avoided eye contact. "I switched an evening shift with Bill Stevens so he could attend his son's soccer game." "All right then, I'll see you later. I might stay out a bit longer myself. There's a project at my lab that needs debugging." After Sally left for work, I stayed behind briefly to review the scent logs from our dining room. Besides a strong bacon smell, there were noticeable volatile catecholamines in the air. It seemed Sally was distressed and possibly even a bit scared about something. Working from home that day, I periodically checked the tracker app. Everything appeared normal until around 5 p.m. when I prepared some sandwiches and drinks and drove to Sally's clinic, parking a few blocks away. At about 6 p.m., my app alerted me. She was on the move. I observed her car leave the clinic parking lot and head in the opposite direction of the hospital. I followed her for several miles until North Aurora Avenue. She pulled into the Shady Nell Motel's parking lot and circled to the back of the building. I quickly parked nearby and stealthily approached the building on foot, arriving just as she entered room 127 and knocked on the door. Returning to my car, I found a parking spot a few rows behind Sally's with a clear view of room 127. After a short wait, I exited the vehicle and quietly approached the room. The lights were on, but the curtains were tightly drawn. Nothing was visible. I leaned closer to listen, but couldn't hear anything over the noise from an ice machine nearby. I then walked around the parking lot and used my phone to photograph the license plates of every car present. Returning to my car, I waited with the camera in hand. About 30 minutes later, the door to room 127 opened and Sally emerged. I captured some video footage of this. I could barely hear a man shouting inside the room for a few moments before she forcefully closed the door and returned to her car, driving away. Deciding to stay and see who else might leave the room, I waited another 30 minutes. A man I vaguely recognized exited the room and got into a Honda parked close by. I didn't know his name, but at least I now had his license plate number. I opened the GPS application and noticed that Sally's car had stopped moving once more. Zooming into the map, I spotted an icon labeled Streamliner Diner, a place where Sally and I had dined several times. They offered good, unpretentious meals at reasonable prices. I drove into the diner's parking area and glanced through the window. There, Sally was seated alone at a table, sipping coffee. I found a discreet spot nearby that overlooked her table. However, she only interacted with the waitress and didn't speak to anyone else. Around 10:45 p.m., she stood up to settle her bill. I quickly returned to my car and headed home, managing to arrive about 5 minutes before Sally. Sally arrived at our driveway around 11:15 p.m. When she entered the house, it mirrored the evening she came back from the convention. No hugs or kisses, and she headed straight to the shower and bed after exchanging just a few words with me. After she fell asleep, I sneaked into the laundry room and processed her clothes with an electronic spout. As expected, traces of a white substance were found on her clothes, matching those I found on her clothes last week. I was extremely unhappy. I poured myself a generous amount of Writer's Tears whiskey and sat down to brood over my unhappy thoughts. While sipping, I tried to recall where I had seen the man in room 127. Applying Occam's razor, I considered the simplest explanation first, that Mr. Shady Nell was also Mr. Chicago. If he had been in Chicago during Sally's internal medicine convention, he might also be an internist. I took out my iPad and visited the King County Medical Society's website. Navigating through a drop-down menu, I selected Internal Medicine and shortly received a list of 174 general internists in our area. I went through the names one by one, looking at their photos. It was unfortunate timing that I didn't recognize his picture until the end of the list. Tom Wilson. From his practice location, I saw he worked across town from Sally's clinic. All right, that clarified why he seemed so familiar. Sally and I had attended numerous informal dinners together for various local medical events, so I had likely seen him at one of them. It now appeared highly probable that he had indeed been in Chicago with Sally last week. Tonight was probably a continuation of whatever had begun there. This was bad. I decided to pour the whiskey back into the bottle, knowing I needed a clear mind for the next day. My head was racing from all the suspense, so I took a sleeping pill and settled into bed beside Sally. Eventually, I drifted into a 6-hour sleep filled with nightmares where I kept failing repeatedly at a series of unclear and impossible tasks. Waking up from my nightmare was immensely relieving. However, that sense of relief quickly vanished when I recalled the real nightmare I was currently experiencing. Sally was already awake. I got out of bed, used the bathroom, and took a shower. The warm water was soothing, but I knew I couldn't delay addressing the situation with Sally any longer. She was seated at our kitchen table, sipping coffee and eating toast. I grabbed a cup of coffee and joined her. All right, it was time. I inhaled deeply and said, "Sally, we need to talk." "About what?" "You've been acting distant since you returned from Chicago. Is there something you need to share with me?" Her expression fell, and tears began to stream down her face. "I'm so sorry. Something terrible happened in Chicago, and it's been tearing me apart inside. I wanted to tell you, but I was scared you'd hate me." She was now openly crying. My immediate instinct was to comfort her, but I struggled to hold back and instead handed her a box of tissues. "Take your time. I have all day." Gradually, she composed herself, took a deep breath, and exhaled. Everything was fine until Friday. After the afternoon sessions, I had dinner with some colleagues at my hotel. Later, we had a few drinks at the hotel bar. The next thing I remember, I woke up in bed. I was confused, not sure how I had ended up there. The only thing that seemed to make sense was that you had somehow come to Chicago and entered my room. I said, "John, what are you doing here?" Then a voice I didn't expect said, "I'm here again." I turned around, confused, and yelled, "Who are you? Tom! What are you doing in my room?" It was Tom Wilson, another colleague from Seattle. He replied, "Don't you remember? We had a few drinks last night, and then you invited me up to your room. We spent the rest of the night together. You were so irresistible last night. I couldn't resist one more time before you left for home." I screamed at him to leave. He responded, "Sure, no worries, but I'll see you again once we're back in Seattle." I yelled, "No way! Get out!" Sally started crying again. She looked so devastated that I couldn't bear it any longer. I moved beside her and held her in my arms. We cried together for several minutes. I gently stroked her hair, trying to comfort her. As her sobbing subsided, she looked at me and said, "I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened. I would never do something like that. Please believe me." I nodded. "Yeah, that really doesn't sound like something you'd do." "What else happened?" "After he left my room, I was in shock, but I knew I had to get to the airport. I just threw everything into my bag and grabbed a cab to O'Hare. The flight home felt endless. I kept oscillating between horror at what had happened and dread about telling you. Since I didn't have time to shower, I could still feel the aftermath of what happened. It was revolting. That's why I was so abrupt when I got home. All I could think about was taking a long, hot shower to wash away everything, but it didn't help. I've barely slept this entire week. I had finally decided what to tell you when Tom called on Wednesday. He said he wanted to meet up again. I raised my eyebrows. Before I could say anything, Sally added, "Don't worry, I told him to go away." But then he said he had videos of us together and threatened to show them to you. I tried to stall him, but he insisted we meet at a motel in North Aurora. That's where I went last night. My heart sank. "So, swapping shifts with Bill was a lie?" Her face crumpled. "Yes, and I'm so sorry. I was desperate to fix things. I was anxious, sleep-deprived, and made a terrible decision." I sighed and shook my head. "So, what happened during your meeting last night?" "No, that's not what happened. I went to the motel to buy time and come up with a better plan. I did not go there to meet him again." "And why should I believe you?" "It sounds bad, but please let me explain." I shrugged and gestured for her to continue. When I got there, he started undressing and told me to join him. I refused, so he pulled out his iPad and showed me a short clip of us together. I started crying, but he just laughed and continued pushing me. He said if I didn't do what he wanted, he'd send the video out. Sally was sobbing. It was horrible. He grabbed me and tried to force me into something I didn't want. He was persistent, but I kept struggling. When he didn't stop, I knew I had to act. I was disgusted. I had an idea, so I tried to make myself sick to get him off me. It worked. He ran to the bathroom in panic. I was stunned. "You made yourself sick?" "Yes, it wasn't easy, but it worked. He was so upset he ran off. I couldn't believe what had happened. I felt disgusting. I just wanted to leave and put everything behind me." I stared at Sally with wide eyes, feeling like a fish with bulging eyes. Then, the sheer absurdity of the situation hit me, and I burst into laughter. Initially, Sally seemed surprised, but soon she joined in. It created a loop of laughter, starting with me and escalating with her laughing even harder. "Did you do something to his private area?" Yeah, I messed up his things. Did you throw up on his intimate parts? Yep, it was quite a mess for him. Did you harm his body? Well, I ended up vomiting on his prosthetic. Did you throw up on his lap? I really did, yeah. Did you throw up on his clothing? I accidentally spilled on his clothes. Did you end up making a mess on his personal space? Yeah, I made quite a mess there. Did you really hit him in the groin? As Jerry Lee Lewis would say, great balls of fire. I stopped laughing. I give up, I give up. I should have realized by now that exchanging anatomical jokes with a doctor was like bringing a taco to a machete fight. We laughed until we were nearly out of breath. Eventually, we found ourselves in each other's arms, gasping for air between bursts of giggles. When we finally settled down, I took a deep breath and exhaled. Wow, I really didn't expect our conversation to end like this. Me neither. I was really worried you'd be kicking me out by now. I had some dark thoughts too, but I needed to hear your perspective first. You know, this is the first time I've seen a spark in your eyes since you went to that meeting in Chicago. It feels like you're back. Thank you, sweetie. It's the first time I've felt like laughing in a long time. But we still need to talk about the issue in Chicago. What happened with Tom? I've shared what I remember. Now let me tell you what I believe really happened. Okay. Do you know about the illegal substances that are used on dates? I looked confused for a moment. Then my eyes widened. Oh no! I should have thought of that. Me too. I would have thought of it right away if one of my patients told me something like that. But the combination of sleep deprivation, guilt, anxiety, and possibly some residual prohibited substances has left me functioning with only half a brain this week. She paused for a few seconds. And honestly, there's also the denial. Here I am, a smart, educated woman, a doctor. It's hard to admit that I was so foolish to let someone slip something into my drink. She started crying again, and I held her. Don't be so hard on yourself, sweetie. You trusted someone you knew for years. It could happen to anyone. I held her until she calmed down, then asked, Is it too late to get a prohibited substances test? It really depends on the prohibited substances. Some are eliminated from the body quickly, others take longer. It's been too long for alcohol or GHB to show up in my blood or urine, but certain long-lasting benzodiazepines could still be detectable. The good news is that some prohibited substances can be identified in hair samples for weeks after. I said, Honey, if Tom prohibited substances then you didn't cheat on me. You were assaulted. What happened last night was another case of intimacy violence. How would you respond if one of your patients was attacked? You're right. I would take them to the emergency room immediately and collect a intimacy assault forensic evidence kit. Let's go now. Even if my blood or urine tests come back negative, the prohibited substances might still be in my hair. One more thing, Sally. Is there any chance that Tom could have caused you to get pregnant or given you an STD? She shook her head. I did one smart thing in Chicago. I had my cab stop at a pharmacy on the way to O'Hare. I bought a Plan B emergency contraception kit and took it right away. To reduce the risk of pregnancy, I'll also ask them to insert a copper IUD once they've gathered all the RPE kit samples. I'll also get tested for STDs once they've collected the evidence. Sally and I made calls. She reached out to Wilma Barrett, a gynecologist from her clinic, who also works as an intimacy assault forensic examiner. I contacted my close friend Mark Johnson. We met years ago at a local music festival. Besides being an amazing guitar player, Mark is also a detective with the Seattle Police Department. We drove to the emergency room and encountered Mark in the parking lot. When Sally tried to greet him, Mark requested she wait until after the forensic examination. Together, we entered the hospital and were greeted by Wilma. I briefed Mark on what had happened to Sally. Approximately 4 hours later, Sally completed her examination. A few minutes after that, Wilma joined us and took a seat beside us. She said, Sally is currently showering and will come out once she's done. John, she has authorized me to speak with both of you. However, some of the details might be difficult to hear. Do you really want me to share everything I'm about to tell Mark? I nodded in agreement. All right, I've just finished conducting a thorough physical examination on Sally. I began by collecting hair samples from her scalp and other areas. We also took blood and urine samples and examined beneath her fingernails. Following that, I took additional samples and performed a careful medical examination of her body. I also used a specialized medical camera to inspect for any signs of injury. I found some bruising and signs of injury that are consistent with recent trauma. John, when was the last time you and Sally were intimate? Not since just before she left for Chicago. It's been over 2 weeks for us. Sally's injuries are definitely more recent than that. Wilma turned to Mark. We'll send all our samples for DNA analysis, but that could take a week or two, even with expedited processing. However, we should have some of the blood and urine results within a few hours, especially with my connections in the lab. The STD results will be available in a day or two. We're sending the hair sample for a comprehensive analysis, which will take at least a few days. I'll contact you once we have all the prohibited substances test results. I took out a plastic specimen bag and handed it to Wilma. Here are Sally's patais that she wore on her flight home. Could these be tested as well? Wilma raised her eyebrows. Where did these come from? Sally seemed a bit off after I brought her home from the airport. She didn't say much during the ride and immediately went to shower. While she was in there, I looked over her clothes. Her patais appeared stained, so I carefully placed them in this bag. I haven't touched them otherwise. Wilma gave me a stern look. Most husbands don't treat their wife's clothing as evidence when they return from a trip. Why did you collect these, John? I sighed. I had a reason to be concerned about Sally. I'll explain everything. I paused briefly. And I'll tell Sally as well. While waiting for Sally, I explained to Mark and Wilma how I had used a device that could detect subtle changes in behavior, which led me to collect the patais. Mark shook his head. That sounds pretty unconventional, like a polygraph. We can't use those readings as evidence, but we can definitely use anything else it helps us uncover. I felt relieved by his response. A few minutes later, Sally emerged. We said our goodbyes to Mark and Wilma and headed home. We had a quiet dinner and went to bed early. We shared a peaceful moment before falling asleep. Our 2 days of emotional turmoil had left us both mentally and physically exhausted, so the next morning, Sally called in sick. After dinner on Monday evening, I mustered the courage to explain the device to Sally and how I used it to assess her behavior, which led me to collect the patais. She thought about it for a moment and then said, I'm really angry that you were monitoring me like that. You should have been upfront with me about what you were doing. I looked down. You're right. I should have. I'm sorry. She continued. I've been keeping things from you too. It seems we both have work to do to rebuild each other's trust. She sighed. However, overall, I'm glad you used that device. It pushed us to confront everything and led you to preserve the evidence. The next 2 days gave me plenty of time to reflect on the emotional and chaotic journey we had been on. My trust in my wife had been shaken when the device suggested something might be off, but I couldn't bear the thought of her being hurt. I desperately wanted to believe her account. I found myself hoping the test results would confirm her story, even though it felt strange to hope for something so distressing. I felt conflicted. What if the results were positive? Would that clear up all my doubts? Could I trust her again? Sally's honest responses during my confrontation with Wilma gave me hope. I hoped the test results would clarify everything. Waiting for the results was agonizing. Sally kept busy by spending time at the gym or working in the garden. I kept myself occupied with a stationary bike at home and working on improving the device. These activities helped us both relax enough to sleep each night. Wilma contacted us on Wednesday to share some initial findings. We somehow managed to reach her office without being stopped for speeding. She greeted us, saying, I appreciate you coming in. I have both good and bad news. All the swabs we've collected have tested negative so far. However, Sally's clothing tested positive for certain substances, and we're still awaiting the DNA analysis for that. The blood tests only detected trace amounts of benzodiazepines. The most positive news is that your hair samples showed strong positive results. Gas chromatography and mass spectrometry of the hair revealed clear evidence of several prohibited substances, including benzodiazepines, ketamine, and zolpidem. Sally, someone tampered with your drink. Sally and I exchanged looks, and her expression faltered. I pulled her into my arms, and we both began to cry. I felt an immense sense of relief, quickly followed by a touch of joy and a strong urge to comfort my wife. Wilma, noticing our reaction, handed us a box of tissues, giving us a moment to process the news. After a few minutes, Sally gave me one final hug and sat back down. She took a deep breath and shouted, "That horrible person! That despicable excuse for a man! That cowardly, vile individual! How could anyone do this?" I should mention that Sally's colorful language came from her upbringing as the child of two former Marine drill sergeants. They regarded creative expression as an art form, and Sally had become quite adept at it. Her extensive medical training also gave her a unique understanding of how to use precise and strong language. After a few more frustrated outbursts, she composed herself and, in a calm and determined tone, declared, "This needs to be addressed." I nodded. "I agree, sweetie. But let's stay smart about it." Noticing Wilma's confused expression, I explained, "Sorry, two high school Latin club enthusiasts arguing." She referenced a historical saying, meaning a significant wrong must be righted. Wilma raised her eyebrows. "What did you say to her?" I responded, "Yes, but let's be cautious. We need to make sure we do it the right way. We agree that he must be held accountable, but we need to do it without breaking the law." Wilma promised to send the lab results to Mark, and we headed home. That evening, Mark visited our house to discuss the case. He was pleased with the preliminary results of the RP kit, but wasn't optimistic about securing a charge against Tom. The issue is that most intimacy assault cases are challenging because they often become a he said, she said situation. It can be difficult to predict which side a jury will believe. It would be helpful if we could gather more evidence against him. I asked, "How can we do that?" Mark replied, "Catching him in the act with witnesses would be conclusive, but waiting for him to act again could take months, and we can't keep Sally under constant surveillance for that long." Sally suggested, "But couldn't we set up a plan to get him to confess?" "What if I wore a wire?" Mark shook his head. "That's too much to ask of you, Sally. It will be hard enough for you to handle what Wilson has already done. I won't ask you to go through that again." "But what if I want to? What if I can stop this from happening to another person?" she insisted. "Okay, Sally, but all we can do is wait for him to make a move. I can prepare a few things in advance. If he approaches you again, let me know immediately. I can get an emergency warrant that will allow us to record any encounter, and we can have officers nearby." One of Sally's co-workers suggested that she see a therapist to help her cope with the emotional challenges she was facing, including feelings of anger, shame, and depression. I also began attending therapy sessions and joined a support group for partners of individuals recovering from traumatic experiences. The following week, Sally returned to work on a part-time basis. For the next 2 weeks, everything seemed to return to normal. Then, one afternoon, Sally called me. "John, Tom reached out to me again. He wants to meet at the same motel this Friday at 7 p.m., and he's threatening to release those videos." I immediately contacted Mark, who began the process of obtaining a warrant. By Friday morning, Mark informed me that the warrant had been secured for the operation, and several officers would be involved in the plan. Sally took the day off to prepare, keeping herself busy with household tasks like laundry, vacuuming, gardening, and exercising on the treadmill and exercise bike to help manage her stress. At 5 p.m., Mark arrived. "Sally, I want to give you another chance to reconsider the operation. These kinds of operations can be risky, even for professionals. It's especially dangerous for you. We can explore other options to apprehend him. What do you think? Thank you, but I'm still committed. I want to make sure he faces justice. Mark nodded. All right. We'll do everything possible to ensure your safety. We don't have any evidence that Tom is armed, but we will approach this as if he might be. We'll be monitoring you closely with video and audio. If at any point you feel unsafe or need to end the operation, use a safe word and we'll intervene immediately. Do you have a word in mind? I'll use the word disgusting if I feel uncomfortable. That works. We'll place a recorder in your purse and set up surveillance in the motel room. We'll be listening to all your interactions. Once we have enough evidence for a conviction, we'll enter the room without warning. When that happens, drop to the floor and stay there until we've got him under control. Is that clear? Yes, I understand. Drop to the floor and stay down. Good. Remember, the goal is to get him to confess and provide as much information as possible about his actions and threats. Also, avoid accepting any food or drinks he offers. I asked Mark, "Can I be part of the operation?" Mark shook his head. "I'm sorry, but it's too risky. It's dangerous enough with Sally in this position, and we don't have anyone else to act as the decoy. You're not essential to this part of the operation, John. I and several officers will be monitoring from a surveillance van nearby." I winced, and he responded, "Nonetheless, you can accompany us in one of our unmarked police vehicles. You'll be waiting roughly a minute away, and we'll bring you to the scene as soon as we have Wilson detained." I nodded and turned to Sally. "Honey, you're incredibly brave. I don't have the strength to do what you're about to undertake. I love you and will be there as soon as Mark allows me." She embraced me tightly. "I love you too. Thank you for believing in me, even after I did something so awful." I shook my head. "No, the only awful thing is what Wilson did to you. You're an amazing woman and I love you. I'm so proud of what you're doing tonight." Tom introduced me to the two detectives who would be waiting off-site with me. We shook hands and they led me to their car. They drove us to a small parking lot a few blocks from the motel and parked. Then we waited. The two officers beside me spent their time on their phones, calmly reading emails. I attempted to do the same, but I was too restless to read more than a few lines. I kept glancing at my watch every few minutes. As 7 p.m. finally drew near, the three of us put our phones aside and straightened our seats. One detective's phone screen lit up. He held it to his ear briefly and said, "Sally just arrived." He paused for about 30 seconds. "She's out of her car and knocking on Wilson's door." Another pause. "She's inside." The next 5 minutes dragged on, feeling like 50. "They're still just talking." Another 5 minutes passed even more slowly. Just talking. After another 5 seemingly endless minutes, our driver suddenly dropped the phone and started the car. "She used the code word! We're moving in!" I was relieved to have my seatbelt on. Police cars have impressive torque. We sped away quickly, lights flashing. Within seconds, we reached the motel and swerved to a stop a few feet from room 127. The two detectives instructed me to stay in the car and rushed toward the room. I ignored their orders and tried to open the car door, but it was locked. Damn. Through the open room door, I could see several armed police officers. I was about to panic. However, as I watched, some of them holstered their weapons. Finally, I saw Mark approaching the door. He noticed me in the back of the car and came over to open my door. I attempted to run into the room, but he grabbed my shoulders and said, "She's okay, John." "She's okay. She'll be out in just a minute." He pulled me into a hug. Sally was incredible. She helped us gather everything we needed to secure him. "Thanks, Mark. I was so freaking scared. Did he hurt her?" "Not at all." He laughed. "Actually, there was some roughness, but it was the other way around." "What do you mean?" "Right before the situation escalated, Wilson tried to grab her. She responded by drop-kicking him into the next zip code. When we burst through the door, Wilson was on the floor screaming. She was advancing on him with the most terrifying look I've ever seen on a woman. She delivered another solid stomp or two before we could pull her away. I'll show you the video later. We captured the entire incident in 4K from multiple angles. We turned towards the room just in time to see Sally exiting, her eyes blazing with determination. As she stepped outside, the police applauded. Upon noticing me, her fierce demeanor softened, and she rushed into my arms. "Oh, John! I'm so relieved that's over." I held her tightly as she cried, telling her how incredible she was. I believe I shed a few tears myself. EMTs wheeled a stretcher into the motel room. After about 10 minutes, they brought it back out with Wilson groaning on it. Sally tensed, and for a moment I saw a fierce, intense look in her eyes. She shouted, "I hope you get what you deserve." Then she relaxed and said, "Taking down bad guys is exhausting. Do you think they'd let us grab a milkshake on the way to the station?" "I'm sure we can make that happen, sweetie." No one objected to us stopping and drinking a milkshake. In fact, Mark joined us at a diner on Lake City Way. It turns out that the fight against crime also causes an appetite. After enjoying the meal and the milkshake, we were ready to start the next part of the evening. However, when we were about to go to the police station, Mark got a call. He spoke for a few minutes, then hung up and turned to us. "Looks like we won't need you tonight, Sally. That was one of my guys from Harborview Medical Center. The EMTs took him there to have his injuries examined. It seems they had to rush him to surgery right away." I shot Sally a sidelong glance. "So, once again, you were the one who stopped him?" She smiled at me. "Yes, sweetie. I got angry and did something to make sure he wouldn't hurt anyone again." Mark raised his eyebrows at our exchange and shook his head. I asked, "What?" "I'm just not used to seeing humor in these kinds of situations," Mark said. Sally responded, "I'm sorry if it seemed inappropriate. I assure you that neither John nor I are making light of the situation. What happened to me was traumatic, and I've been working through it with therapy. It's been tough, but I'm determined to heal. Humor, in our case, helps us find moments of lightness as we move forward together." I added, "This isn't about us making jokes about trauma. It's about rebuilding our relationship. Humor has always been a part of how we connect. When Sally came back from Chicago, things changed for us. So if a few bad jokes can help us find a bit of light again, I'm all for it." Mark paused briefly, then nodded and said, "All right, I get it." Thanks to Sally's actions, Wilson will be in the hospital for a week. After that, we'll bring him in for questioning and processing. Get some rest, and I'll see you tomorrow for the rest of your statement. Sally and I returned home and went to bed, but we were too restless to sleep. We tried to discuss other topics, but our conversation kept circling back to Tom Wilson. Sally remarked, "Mark mentioned that Tom will face charges not only for second-degree RPE, but also for extortion due to his blackmail attempts against me. In addition to prison, he will lose his medical license and likely never work in the medical field again." "That seems like a fair outcome to me," I responded. "Yes, but I'm concerned about his clinic partners. They're good people, and this could ruin their practice for years." "Yeah, I remember that case a few years back where an anesthesiologist was involved in a similar situation. It hurt the hospital's reputation for a long time. In times like these, I'm grateful I'm not in the medical profession. By the way, is Tom married?" "I believe so. I met his wife at a local internal medicine society event. Her name is Nora, and they have a son, probably around 13 years old." Oh man, I'm all for exposing what he did, but I can't help feeling bad for his family. Being a teenager is tough enough without your dad's actions becoming public knowledge. Sally nestled closer to me and sighed. I asked, "What's wrong?" "My therapist worries that being intimate with you might trigger memories of my assault by Tom. But I'm hopeful. What we share is so different from what he did to me. I'm glad to hear that, sweetheart. I had similar concerns. Don't worry about it. Don't worry? What does that mean? It's just a phrase, a way of saying, no way. In case you ever hear me get uncomfortable, it won't be about what happened before. It'll be about us, and only us. Your wit amazes me. That's one of the reasons I adore you. I adore you too, John. She sighed and cuddled even closer. Soon, we both drifted off into a peaceful, comfortable sleep. Sally and I stayed up late and enjoyed a relaxed breakfast the next morning. Afterwards, we met Mark at the Seattle North Precinct Police Station. Mark escorted us to a monitoring room where we could view the footage from the sting operation. He explained, after identifying the motel room Tom had reserved, our technical team went there with the operation warrant. They entered the room a few hours before Tom arrived, giving them ample time to set up 3 separate cameras and various microphones throughout the space. We took the standard desk clerk out for dinner and stationed one of our undercover officers at the front desk. The result is excellent 4K video from 3 different perspectives covering the entire operation. Mark began the video by showing Tom entering room 127. Tom arrived around 6 o'clock and began positioning one of his own cameras on a tripod. We believe he intended to capture additional blackmail material to use against Sally. Mark accelerated the playback, revealing Tom moving frantically around the room like a hyperactive gerbil. We had our first significant breakthrough here. He slowed the video to half speed. This footage clearly shows Tom entering his phone's passcode. This is crucial because we can now use that passcode to change the system passwords on all his devices. This action will prevent him or any partner from erasing evidence from these gadgets. Additionally, it allows us to access all the media on his phone, iPad, and Mac. Did you locate any of the blackmail videos he made of Sally? Yes, we did. We discovered several of hers and a few video files of other women. However, we believe he has many more files hidden elsewhere. With control over his devices, we can examine his password files to find cloud accounts on external servers. He might also have copies stored in a physical location, but we didn't find any at his residence. Mark increased the playback speed again until Sally walked into the room. The following 20 minutes showed Tom attempting unsuccessfully to persuade Sally to undress. Sally skillfully manipulated him, causing him to reiterate his threats to release the videos he had made of them in Chicago. As Sally remained hesitant, Tom offered her a drink to help her relax. Sally accepted the glass and began to bring it to her lips. At the last moment, she wrinkled her nose, placed the drink on the bedside table away from Tom, and uttered the words that initiated the takedown. "This smells disgusting!" At that moment, Tom attempted to push Sally aside and grab the drink from her. However, Sally stood her ground and refused to move. In response, she defended herself with a quick, controlled kick, causing Tom to stumble back. Just moments later, the police arrived and forcefully broke down the door. Before they could apprehend Tom, Sally delivered a few more defensive strikes, which helped to subdue him. The officers quickly intervened, pulling her away and restraining the struggling man. Mark commented, "We've uncovered some details about the drink Tom tried to give Sally. It appears to be a dangerous combination of alcohol, sedatives, and a stimulant. When we searched his belongings at the motel, we found similar substances. This could lead to additional charges against him." I raised my hand and asked, "You mentioned videos of other women. Does that mean Sally isn't his first target?" Mark nodded. "Yes, that's our theory. Tom seemed very familiar with setting up videos for Sally, so we believe this isn't the first time he's targeted someone, possibly multiple women. We're still analyzing all his devices for additional footage or evidence. Thanks to our sting operation, we were able to secure a warrant to search his house. We've seized more electronics there, and a preliminary search of the data is ongoing. So far, we haven't found much more, but we suspect there may be more files stored elsewhere. We're continuing to track his online accounts, including email, cloud storage, and backup services. Additionally, We've investigated his clinic office and are collaborating with his wife to gather more information on his finances and any potential hidden assets. I rubbed my face and asked, "So, what's going to happen to Wilson next?" "He'll stay under guard at the hospital until he's discharged. His doctor estimates he'll remain there for about another week. After that, he'll be brought before the court for arraignment within a week of his release. That's when bail will be determined. Once he pays bail, he'll be released while awaiting his trial." Sally responded, "Wait, they're going to release him on bail?" "Yes. The Eighth Amendment prevents setting excessive bail. Given the current charges, his bail could range from $50,000 to several $100,000. If Wilson can come up with 10% of that amount, a bail bondsman will cover the rest as a loan. Damn it, I sincerely hope you all can locate his hidden files before he secures bail. Otherwise, he'll have the opportunity to distribute those videos of me. We'll do everything we can, Sally." The following day, Sally called me from her clinic. Guess who my 2 o'clock walk-in patient was today? I took a random guess, naming some famous rock star. Nope, it was Nora Wilson, Tom's wife. Wow, what did she need? She said she felt awful about what Tom had done to me. She's been working with the police and wants to do whatever she can to help get him jailed. Why is she supporting you and not her husband? She said Tom has been abusing her. She finally reached her breaking point a few weeks ago and left him. She and her son are staying with her parents now. Tom is an even bigger jerk than I thought. We didn't have much time to talk at the clinic, so I invited her over for pizza tonight at 6. She's fine with anything except olives and anchovies. I tried to get back to work, but my mind kept wandering. So I distracted myself with some household chores. Soon I found myself buried in exhausting yard work. After hauling a mountain of leaves and grass clippings into the compost bin, I showered and ordered the pizza. Around 6 p.m., I answered the doorbell. 2 women stood there, one holding a pizza carrier. I paid for the food and turned to the other woman, slender, about Sally's height, with short dark hair. "Hi, I'm John. Come on in." "I'm Nora. Thanks for having me." We set the table and she accepted a glass of wine. We chatted casually while waiting for Sally. Sally rushed in about 10 minutes later. "Sorry I'm late. I had a few extra patients." I handed Sally a glass of wine, and we made more small talk while devouring the pizzas. Eventually, we pushed our plates back, and Nora turned to Sally. "Thanks again for seeing me. This is really awkward, but I needed to talk to you. Tom and I have had our issues, but I was heartbroken when the police told me about his arrest. I feel guilty about what happened to you." "Why do you feel guilty? Did you know what he was planning to do to me?" "No. We've been having problems for a while, but I never imagined he was capable of something like that." Sally asked, "How long has this been going on?" "At least 5 years. That's when I went back to work. Tom started criticizing everything I did, how I handled things, even how I looked. If Billy had trouble at school or struggled with his homework, Tom always blamed me. He would get upset if I spoke to other parents at school events or chatted with coworkers. Our relationship has been strained for years and it's only gotten worse. He became more demanding and disrespectful, especially when he'd been drinking. The last straw came a few weeks ago when he got upset because there wasn't any beer in the house and shouted at me in front of Billy. When Billy started crying, Tom got angry at him too. The next day, I decided I couldn't do this anymore. I packed up our things and moved in with my parents. That was about a week before his trip to Chicago. I feel like I pushed him over the edge, and he took it out on you. I'm so sorry." Nora started crying. Sally moved her chair closer and wrapped Nora in her arms. "Sweetheart, you did nothing wrong. You were protecting yourself and your son. Everything Tom did is his responsibility, not yours. I don't blame you at all." Nora sobbed for a while, then composed herself. "Thank you for saying that. The last few weeks have been so difficult. Since we moved out, I've been bombarded with angry messages from Tom. He says I've ruined everything, that he's going to divorce me, take Billy away, and leave me with nothing. He even claims to have hidden all our money and investments so I won't be able to find them. Sally said, "That's awful. Have you spoken to a lawyer?" "Yes, but it's complicated. A quick financial review shows that Tom has already moved a lot of our money. My lawyer has filed to stop him from doing more damage, and we might be able to recover some assets, but it will take time. Tom was the main earner in our family, so things will be tough for Billy and me on just my salary." I asked, "Any idea where he might have hidden it?" My lawyer said it could be anywhere, an account under a different name, maybe even cash somewhere. However, Tom isn't very tech-savvy, so it's unlikely he'd use something complicated. It's probably in a physical location he knows well. I nodded. In a city like Seattle, that could be tough to track down. Nora gave a small laugh. Funny enough, Tom actually could hide something in plain sight. He inherited a small piece of farmland south of town from his grandparents. It's about 10 acres, and he leases it out to a local farmer who uses it for hay. If he hid something in one of the barns, I'd never find it. Sally said, "There are plenty of banks in town, and he could have put something in a safety deposit box." "That's a good point," I replied. "Safety deposit box keys have a distinct look. Do you know if he has any unusual keys lying around?" "Now that you mention it, he does keep a set of keys in his desk at home. I never really thought much about them before." I said, "We should let Detective Mark Johnson know about these possibilities. If he has a safety deposit key, the police might be able to get a warrant to check it." Sally added, "There are also a lot of storage units around Seattle where he could hide just about anything. I had an idea, but I didn't want to get Sally or Nora's hopes up just yet. Instead, I said, I'll call Mark and share what we've discussed." The next day, I met with Mark and updated him on our conversation with Nora. He, in turn, briefed me on the police investigation. "We've examined his computer and online accounts. So far, we haven't found any hidden video files or evidence of offshore bank accounts." I'd agree with Nora's assessment that Tom isn't a tech genius, so that avenue seems to be a dead end. How about the key ring Nora mentioned? Could it point us toward a specific bank? Mark skimmed through the police search log for Tom's house. "Here it is. The key ring is listed in the inventory, and here's a picture of it." He studied the photo before saying, "A few of these keys do look like safety deposit box keys. We'll check out the local banks and see what we can find." I nodded. That still leaves us with a frustratingly large number of potential locations to search. Tom could be out on bail in 2 weeks and move things around. However, I have some ideas to help with our search. When can you start questioning Tom? The doctor says he'll be ready for preliminary questioning by tomorrow, but he'll have a lawyer with him and may refuse to answer. When you question someone, can you use non-verbal cues to help guide your interrogation? Yeah, we do. Most of us develop an intuition over time that helps us tell when someone is lying or being truthful. We can't use that instinct in court, but it certainly helps guide the investigation. Okay, so what if your intuition could be enhanced with a little electronic help during the questioning? Tell me more. What do you know about binary trees? Mark chuckled. Not much. What's that got to do with anything? A binary tree is just a fancy way of saying the same process a kid uses in an animal guessing game. By asking a series of yes-no questions, you can quickly narrow down all the possible animals to just a few. For example, you could start by asking if the animal is a mammal, then whether it's bigger than a bread box, if it has hooves, and so on. You could apply the same logic to Wilson. Okay, I get it now. But what kind of electronic assistant are you thinking of? My Enos can detect several non-verbal cues that give a rough yes-no response without Wilson having to speak. Let me explain how it works. Later that evening, Mark called me. "I've arranged to meet Tom and his lawyer tomorrow in a hospital conference room. We can meet a few hours earlier to set up your equipment." I made some final adjustments to the Enos. Originally, the sensor array was bulky, looking like a haphazard collection of kitchen tools. Over the past week, I had managed to repackage it into a much smaller, more discreet form. I managed to fit all the key sensor components into an old iPad case. By adding a small, quiet fan to the intake, I increased its sensitivity and made it somewhat directional. I also installed an IR scanner module and added Wi-Fi and Bluetooth functionality, allowing me to pair the now portable sensor with my phone or laptop. The next day, I met Mark with my latest Enos prototype. Keep this side of the sensor pointed at Wilson on the desk. It will monitor his body odor in real time as you question him, primarily looking for catecholamines and other chemicals related to the fight-or-flight response. It also has an IR photoplethysmography unit to track his pulse by sensing slight changes in his skin's surface. If one of your questions makes him nervous, we should see the catecholamines and pulse rate spike. So it's kind of like a polygraph, right? Exactly. It will track his pulse rate, and you can observe his breathing rate yourself. We won't have blood pressure or skin conductivity, but the catecholamine levels should be a good substitute. When we arrived at the hospital, I paired my laptop with the sensor and handed it over to Mark. I also gave him an earpiece so we could communicate during the interview. One last thing, Mark. The Enos may need 15 to 20 seconds to get a good reading, so pace your questions. Give him enough time to think about each one. Got it. Okay, let's do this. Mark arranged for me to be in a room adjacent to the conference room. The earbuds worked quite well, enabling me to relay the Enos results to him in real time. As Wilson was brought into the conference room by his lawyer, I could hear Mark introduce himself through the earbuds. He informed them that the session would be recorded and then began his questioning. He started with a few basic questions, such as Tom's name, address, and employment history. The Enos display remained stable. As I had advised, Mark asked each question multiple times, allowing the Enos time to react. I won't go into the entire interrogation, but here are some key moments. Q. Did you attend the Internal Medicine Convention in Chicago on these dates? A. Yes. Enos. Stable. Q. Did you have a private encounter with Sally Anderson in her hotel room? A. Yes. Enos. Stable. Q. Did you engage in any inappropriate behavior with Sally Anderson in her hotel room? A. No. She came on to me and invited me to her room. Enos. Increased pulse and a sharp spike in catecholamines. Q. Did you record your encounter with Sally Anderson? A. Yes. Enos. Stable. Q. Did you threaten Sally Anderson to force her into another encounter? A. No way. She enjoyed being with me and wanted to see me again. Enos. Pulse rate and catecholamine levels increased. Q. Have you engaged in inappropriate behavior with other women? A. No. Enos. Significant increase in pulse rate and a large spike in catecholamines. Q. Do you have videos of these encounters? A. No. Enos. Pulse and catecholamine levels remained elevated. Q. Are these videos hidden at your home? A. No. Enos. Pulse and catecholamine levels returned to normal. Q. Do you have these videos hidden elsewhere? A. No, I don't have any hidden videos. Enos. Significant rise in pulse rate and a large catecholamine spike. And so it continued. Later that afternoon, Mark and I reviewed the Enos data in relation to each question. The results were 1. Wilson had likely engaged in inappropriate behavior with several other women. 2. Wilson probably had a hidden stash of videos not stored in a cloud account. 3. The videos were likely kept on a physical medium. 4. He probably had something hidden elsewhere in Seattle, possibly in a storage locker. 5. Wilson was almost certainly concealing assets from his wife. 6. He might have something stashed on his family farm. While this wouldn't hold up in court, it helped narrow the search from an infinite number of possibilities to a much smaller set. Mark asked, "Okay, we're dealing with dozens of storage facilities, each with hundreds of lockers. A review of his bank records didn't show any payments to a storage company, so he may have paid in cash. Any ideas on how we can focus the search? Yes, I replied. While you were questioning Wilson, I managed to gather a pretty detailed scent profile from him. It'll take some work, but we can use portable Enos units to scan each storage facility. We'll walk through the public areas of each facility, passing by each locker with the Enos. If Wilson has touched the lock or latch on any locker, the Enos should be able to detect his scent. Mark said, Perfect. If we get a hit, we can send a CSI unit to lift prints. If there's a keyed lock, we'll try all the keys on Wilson's ring. We'll also check for any available security footage. We identified 58 storage facilities in Seattle, with about 5,000 total units. I estimated that one of my E-noses could scan at least 2 units per minute. Excluding travel time between locations, it would take us around 42 hours to inspect them all. Mark and I took 2 portable Enos units and started with the facility closest to Wilson's home. If we didn't get a hit there, we'd move on to others in a spiral pattern radiating out from his house. 2 days later, we got lucky. We were screening lockers at Stormore on 15th Avenue West and got a hit on a small unit. A CSI team dusted the lock and found fingerprints matching Wilson's. We were excited by the breakthrough. Mark questioned the Stormore manager and found that the locker had been rented with cash. The name on the agreement was Will Thomason, with an address linked to a mailbox rental business in Magnolia. The security footage showed a hooded figure accessing the locker, but the person's face was obscured. With the fingerprint evidence, Mark was able to obtain a warrant to open the locker. Inside, police discovered a range of illegal substances and a large collection of portable hard drives. Based on the contents of the locker, Mark was optimistic about pursuing charges for several other crimes. We discussed logistics for a while longer before calling it a night. Mark and Nora headed home, and we all got some much-needed rest. Sure, I'll bring several of them. I also have a few other ideas, though they may not work out. Mark continued. The 10 acres we'll be searching is a square, 660 feet on each side. It's a lot of ground to cover with just the 4 of us. I suggest we concentrate on the buildings and the surrounding land. But if Tom has hidden anything far from the buildings, we'll be in trouble. John, can you bring your Enos? Mark had obtained a digital survey map of the farm from the King County Recorder's office. I displayed it alongside a similar Google satellite map on the HD TV screen in our living room. Mark responded, Thanks, Nora. However, we already have enough probable cause to search the farm. I shouldn't have any trouble getting a warrant. That evening, Sally and I held a search planning meeting at our house. After sharing some takeout, Nora began the discussion. I can't express enough how grateful I am for your help with all of this. For what it's worth, you have my permission to search the farm, as long as I can join you tomorrow. We were thrilled to have discovered Wilson's storage locker. We hoped that some of the evidence inside might keep him behind bars even longer. Unfortunately, the locker didn't contain anything that could help resolve Nora's financial issues. However, we still had one more clear lead to follow. Mark's analysis of the binary tree suggested that we might find something hidden on the family farm. Wilson's doctors were planning to discharge him soon, and depending on his arraignment and bail, he could be out of jail within 3 to 7 days. We needed to continue with our search of the farm. The following morning, with a search warrant in hand, we headed to the old Wilson farm, arriving around 8 a.m. Fred Smith, who lived nearby and leased the Wilson land for hay farming, met us there. He gave us a quick tour of the property. I don't see Tom around much. I do occasionally spot his car at the cabin, maybe once a month. He's not much for conversation, just waves and gets on with his business. Nora asked, Do you know of any hiding spots in the buildings or fields? Nope. If he hid anything, it'd have to be in a building. I've been growing hay in these fields for 15 years, and I've never seen any digging out here. We spent the next few hours searching the barn, raking hay, tapping on walls, and scanning the main floor and loft with the Enos. We did the same in the storage sheds. Nothing. Complete dead end. Taking a short break outside, a white van pulled up in front of the barn. It had an abstract logo and the words "Green Site" on the side. A young man jumped out and introduced himself as Will Swanson. "I wasn't sure I'd make it today, but we had a cancellation. What are we surveying today?" The others looked at me, raising their eyebrows. Will's company specializes in aerial surveys of land and crops. I shook his hand and said, "Glad you could make it, Will." I pulled out my iPad and showed him the aerial map. "We'd like you to scan the entire 10-acre field, but focus especially on the buildings." Will retrieved a few cases from the van and, in about 30 minutes, had a drone assembled and ready for flight. He entered the longitude and latitude of the 4 corners of the farm into the control box and launched the drone. It climbed rapidly to 100 feet, then began flying back and forth in a raster pattern, capturing large sections of land on each pass. After about 30 minutes, the drone returned and landed by the van. Will plugged the drone's memory card into his laptop, and his mapping software stitched the image data into a series of high-resolution maps of the farm. He handed me digital copies of all the maps, saying, "Here are visible light, IR, and UV scans of the entire property. That's all I have with me today. Our thermal and magnetic drones are booked today, but I can bring them out next week if you need them." We spent the next hour meticulously searching the pantry and its floor inch by inch, but found nothing. Frustration was mounting, and we were on the verge of using pry bars to lift the flooring when Sally accidentally uncovered the solution. While moving tools off the hanging hooks in the pantry, she rotated one of them 90 degrees by mistake. Upon doing so, she heard a click, and the floor near the pantry door lifted slightly. She grabbed the exposed edge and pulled it up, revealing a steep staircase leading down into a dark space. Holy shit! I joined her by the pantry. "Well done, Sally. Looks like you've found someone's hideout." Mark commented, "We've just discovered the secret bunker of a guy who's currently in jail for multiple felonies. Wilson might have hidden evidence of his crimes down there. We need to preserve that evidence for court, so I need to be the first one in. If I find anything, we'll pull out immediately and get a CSI team in here." I asked, "Should we be concerned about booby traps?" Nora replied, "Tom isn't exactly an expert in electrical or mechanical devices. If there's a booby trap, he didn't make it." That was somewhat reassuring. Mark then turned to me. "Can your Enos do a quick sweep for explosives?" "Sure. Just give me a list of the ones you're concerned about, and I'll download the relevant chemical data." Fortunately, my phone had good 5G coverage at the cabin. 15 minutes later, the Enos was recalibrated and ready to go. I handed it to Mark, and he cautiously descended the stairs. He didn't detect any explosives, but Tom's scent grew stronger. "All clear!" Mark called. I followed him down and saw a heavy metal blast door. Mark turned the wheel on the door until the bolts retracted, then we stood behind it as he slowly opened it. Nothing happened. He carefully peeked around the door's edge and shone his flashlight inside. Clear so far. He crouched down and inspected the bottom of the door frame. No tripwires. After examining the floor for a moment, he added, "No obvious pressure plates either." Mark stepped inside, glanced around, and shone his flashlight over the room. I followed him in and found myself in a rectangular space with corrugated steel walls, about 8 feet high, 8 feet wide, and 20 feet long. Bob didn't find anything unusual in the barn and brought his machine back to the cabin. We moved the furniture to give him full access to scan the floors in the bathroom, bedroom, living room, and kitchen. As far as he could tell, those areas were all on a solid concrete slab. The only spot left unsurveyed was the pantry. We cleared out some tools, canned goods, and other items from the pantry floor. Bob rolled the GPR inside and immediately detected a large void beneath the floor. Very interesting. The door opened into a combined living room and kitchen with a small enclosed pantry. Behind that was a single bedroom and a small bathroom. A quick search didn't show any obvious link between the cabin interior and the void to the west. I scanned the cabin with the Enos to look for Tom's scent. I found traces of it in the bedroom, bathroom, and on the couch in the living room. There was also some scent in the kitchen, especially near the refrigerator. But the strongest concentration was in the enclosed pantry, particularly along the floor. Interesting. We sent Bob to inspect the barn and the area around it, hoping to find any voids under the barn floor that a drone couldn't detect. Meanwhile, we focused on the cabin. Nora went through Tom's keyring and found one that unlocked the front door. This was starting to get interesting. However, a search of the ground didn't reveal any signs of an entrance. Nora had a great idea. Maybe there's a way to access it from inside the cabin. Next, he focused on the larger area west of the cabin. After a few more minutes, he confirmed, "We're looking at a fairly large soil void." He marked the void's outline with more orange flags. When he was finished, we saw a rectangular shape about 8 feet wide and 20 feet long extending from the cabin. Based on the echo patterns, he estimated the void was about 10 feet underground. He began by scanning the smaller area south of the cabin. After a few minutes, he said, "Fairly shallow structures, almost certainly a septic line and tank." He marked the boundaries of both, with small, bright orange flags that appeared from his cart. Bob opened the van's back and rolled out a device about the size of a small grocery cart, mounted on 4 thick 14-inch tires. He powered up the machine and asked where we wanted to start. We led him to the 2 areas of interest by the cabin. I turned back to the van and shook hands with the driver. "Everyone, this is Bob Barnett, GPR Tech Extraordinaire." Seeing the confused stares from Sally and Nora, I added, "GPR stands for Ground Penetrating Radar. It's commonly used for detecting underground utilities and other buried objects. Bob might help us avoid digging and give us more information about what's under those 2 areas near the cabin." Both women looked visibly relieved. My friends gave me skeptical looks again. I raised my hands and said, "Sorry." I wasn't sure he could make it on such short notice. None of us were thrilled at the idea of digging up a septic tank, so we grabbed our digging tools and headed toward the cabin with the enthusiasm of people going to dig their own graves. But before we got too far, a green step van pulled up to the barn, with "Ground Sound" written on the side. Will replied, "It looks like some faint signs of plant stress. I'd guess that someone dug there in the past, maybe for a septic system." Damn, literally. We thanked Will, and he packed up his drone and left. We studied the maps on my laptop screen closely. At first we were disappointed because most of the farm seemed unremarkable in the images. However, Will pointed out 2 features on the infrared image that I hadn't noticed before: a small square area south of the cabin and a larger rectangular area to the west. I asked, "What's that?" The air was thick and musty, with a faint smell of mildew lingering in the atmosphere. Plastic bins were stacked from floor to ceiling along both walls. In the far corner of the room, I noticed a dusty bunk bed, accompanied by a small desk and a folding chair. Above the desk hung a calendar from 1960, its pages yellowed with age. I remarked, "Looks like someone converted a shipping container into a fallout shelter." "A lot of people were building bunkers like this back in the 60s, Sally called down from the stairwell. "Are you guys all right in there? Can we come down?" Mark responded, "Yes, but don't touch anything." Sally descended the stairs and Nora followed. "Wow. Tom brought me out here a few times after we were married, but he never mentioned this room," she said, glancing around. "What's in all these storage bins?" Mark put on a pair of neutral gloves and handed me another pair. We pulled a bin out from under the desk. Mark grunted as he lifted it. "Wow, that's heavier than I expected." We popped open the lid, revealing a stack of old newspapers. As we moved them aside, we discovered several small metal boxes. Opening the first one, we found rolls of gold coins. The next contained a small bag of clear, sparkling stones that looked like diamonds. Another box was filled with silver coins, and another held stacks of $100 bills neatly banded. Nora was stunned. Where did all this come from? Who does it belong to? Tom never said anything about it. Mark opened another plastic bin, revealing clear plastic bags inside. He pulled out the first one, which contained a pair of pay ties and a piece of paper with a date and some initials. He quickly put the bag back and muttered, "Shit. I might be wrong, but I think we've just found a bin full of trophies from Wilson's RPE victims. We're treating this whole bunker as a crime scene. Everyone out." We scrambled out of the bunker, and Mark immediately called a colleague at the King County Sheriff's Department. The first of several deputies arrived about 20 minutes later, and a full CSI team was on site within the hour. The CSI team worked methodically. It was well past dark when they finished photographing the bunker and dusting for fingerprints. They didn't finish cataloging all the contents until after midnight. By the time we got back from the farm, we were completely exhausted. We barely had enough energy to change into comfortable clothes before collapsing into bed. We were asleep within minutes and didn't wake up until we had fully rested. We both decided to take the rest of the week off from work. We spent the time doing small chores around the house and waiting to hear from Mark. 2 days later, he stopped by. After a few hugs, he came inside. "I want to bring you up to speed on our investigation. The storage locker we found in Seattle seems to have been Tom's primary base of operations. He kept a stash of illegal substances there, along with some additional equipment, including a laptop and a large collection of files." He glanced at Sally. "We found several pieces of evidence that confirm everything you told John and me. You were clearly not in control of your actions. Nothing that happened was consensual, and you have nothing to feel guilty about." I let out a deep breath, feeling an overwhelming sense of relief. I pulled Sally into my arms and said, "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I should have known better. Cheating is totally out of character for you. You've got the best moral compass of anyone I know. Hell, you've got moral GPS. Please forgive me for ever doubting you." She held me tight and replied, "It's okay, sweetie. I've been doubting myself for weeks. I still don't remember that night in Chicago, and I was so scared that I somehow caused all of this." Mark's eyes twinkled as he added, "We also found another piece of evidence. I believe you'd call it the turning point moment. By the end of it, our entire team was applauding. I think John would benefit from seeing that one with you." I squeezed her tighter and said, "You're amazing." Mark continued, "Besides the evidence of you, we've found footage of Tom with 6 other women. We've identified 2 and we're working on the others. It looks like some of these women were coerced into interactions with him again. If any are willing to testify, we might be able to add more charges to Tom's case." Sally looked grim but pleased. "Good news, Mark. Thanks. But what did you find in the bunker?" "Ah, the bunker. That seems to have been his main storage space. We found copies of all the evidence there. Tom seems to have kept mementos from his actions. There were several bags filled with items, each labeled with dates and initials. We ran them under a blacklight and found additional evidence, which we're testing now." I asked, "What about the coins, jewels, and cash?" "Well, based on current market values, the coins and cash are worth around $300,000 to $400,000. We haven't had the diamonds appraised yet." I whistled. "Wow, that's quite a stash. Any idea what he was planning to do with it?" "It could be part of a hidden asset plan. There are places in the world where he could live comfortably for years with that much money. Or it might be that he was just trying to hide assets from Nora during their divorce." Mark sighed. "Now, for some bad news. Tom's been arraigned, and bail has been set at $300,000. He'll only need to pay 10% of that to a bondsman, so he'll likely be out on bail by the end of the day," Sally cursed. "I was hoping that bastard would stay in jail a lot longer." She seemed deep in thought. "Will you be keeping an eye on him once he's out? Are we at risk?" "In theory, we could surveil him for up to a year without needing a warrant. But in practice, we just don't have the resources to do that constantly. Our best bet is to get the DA to quickly file additional charges and maybe raise his bail so it's out of his reach. I'd recommend you both lay low as much as possible, limit your time in public, stay home when you're not at work. If Wilson shows up at your place, call us immediately and don't let him in. I installed video surveillance around our house, using both visible light and infrared cameras. I also set up several Enos systems at all entrances to the property. If they detected the scent of Wilson, they would trigger an alert. Neither Sally nor I are ninjas or ex-Navy SEALs. We're not martial artists and don't own any guns. However, we did have our own modest set of abilities. Sally's 2 previous run-ins with Wilson had revealed a frightening knack for tapping into a Hulk-like fury, transforming into she with whom thou shalt not effuck. As for me, I was an alpha geek with plenty of time and a decent bank balance. Plans were made and purchases were made. UPS boxes filled with gear arrived daily to strengthen our fortress. If our home was attacked, we were ready to fend off intruders. There would be heads on pikes. We followed Mark's advice for the next 2 weeks. We cooked all our meals at home, and the only shows we watched were streamed online. We considered hiring a bodyguard, but hesitated due to the cost. A protection dog didn't seem practical for us either. A few nights later, around 11 p.m., the Enos and IR proximity alarms went off. Watching through the security monitors, we saw 2 figures emerge from the darkness. As they approached our front door, the front IR camera clearly identified Tom Wilson, holding a suspicious item in one hand and with his other hand around his wife's neck. Sally shouted, "Plan A!" We immediately dialed 911, double-checked the locks, and braced ourselves, waiting for the police. Wilson hammered on the door and yelled, "Open up, Anderson!" When we stayed silent, he shouted again, "Let me in, or there will be consequences!" We hadn't prepared for this situation. I whispered to Sally, "Plan B! Plan B!" The plan was for her to leave me, slip out the back, run as far as she could, and wait for the police. She shook her head, whispering back, "No way! Plan C!" Wilson pounded the door again and yelled, "I'll do something if you don't open up in 10 seconds. 1, 2, 3. I motioned for Sally to go and whispered, "Okay, Plan C." She slipped into the dark living room to my right. I shouted through the door, "I'm coming! I'm coming! Just a minute!" Wilson kept counting. 6, 7, 8. I unlocked the door, opened it, and stepped back. Wilson stormed in, gripping Nora firmly, the gun still aimed at me. "You've destroyed my life. I'm going to hurt her, then deal with both of you." He scanned the room. "Where is she?" "Sally's not here. She went to visit her sister in Puyallup." Puyallup was our signal for Plan C. I had only a few seconds. 1001, 1002, 1000 and... Sally activated the surprise we had set up in the front bathroom to my left. The loud bark of a large dog echoed through the hall from the high-definition speakers. It sounded like a massive guard dog was inside the house. Wilson flinched, momentarily swinging the gun away from me. That was my chance to take action. As I dove to the ground, Sally used a stun gun on him. Wilson's body jerked violently. The gun discharged with a deafening sound, leaving a hole in the ceiling. He let go of Nora and collapsed to the floor, twitching. I quickly scrambled over and stomped on his wrist. The gun fell from his hand, and I kicked it out of reach. Sally moved in, using another stun gun to incapacitate him further, shouting, "Stay down!" Wilson screamed in agony, and Sally kept working to disable him. By the time the police arrived, he was unable to move. Sally set the stun gun down, and we both raised our hands. The police entered cautiously, guns drawn. Mark arrived a few minutes later and briefed the officers. Weapons were holstered, and Wilson was handcuffed and taken away on a stretcher by EMTs. The CSI team showed up, took photos, collected evidence, including Wilson's gun, and recovered the bullet from the ceiling. The EMTs checked Nora over, and she explained what happened. I made the mistake of stopping by the house to grab more clothes. Bad decision. Tom was waiting there and attacked me. He yelled and hit me for a while. I've never seen him like that. He forced me to drive here at gunpoint. A wave of emotion passed over her face, and after a moment, she took a deep breath and continued. Thank you so much for stopping him. I thought we were all gonna die. The EMTs treated her minor injuries, applied an ice pack to her black eye, and offered to take her to the hospital for further checks, but she declined. They were reassured when Sally mentioned she was a doctor and would monitor her closely. By the time the police left, we were all still shaken. We went to an all-night diner, had coffee, and tried to eat some pie. Mark joined us an hour later with an update. He had charged Wilson with kidnapping and attempted murder. Given his criminal record and what happened tonight, it's unlikely a judge will grant him bail. We eventually calmed down, but none of us wanted to return to the crime scene. Sally booked 2 adjoining hotel rooms. She stayed in one with Nora, while I took the other. Using images from Wilson's video collection and DNA from his belongings, all 6 of the other women he had victimized and blackmailed were eventually identified. 3 of them agreed to testify against him. He was convicted on multiple charges, including abduction, extortion, and attempted murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment and lost his medical license. Nora divorced him and gained full custody of their son. She was awarded the house and 80% of their financial assets. The King County Sheriff's Office could not link the gold, silver, and diamonds from Tom's collection to any criminal activity, and eventually returned them to Nora. Wilson's lawyer tried to argue that the collection was acquired before the marriage, but Nora's lawyer refuted this by pointing out that the mint dates on most of the coins were after their wedding. Additionally, Wilson and his lawyer were unaware that many of the diamonds in his stash were GIA certified and had engraved serial numbers. It was easy for Sally's lawyer to match these serial numbers to purchase dates, all of which occurred after the wedding. The family court judge was outraged by this attempt to hide marital assets and awarded 90% of the collection to Nora and her son. Speaking of Nora, she and Mark have been together for about 6 months now. At first, Sally and I were surprised by this. We had always seen Mark as someone who enjoyed the bachelor life, dating many women but never committing. But he's always had a certain type, women who play string instruments. I think once he heard Nora play the mandolin, he was smitten. He's even taught her son how to play the string bass, and they get along famously. I occasionally join them with my violin, and we perform at square dances and contra dances together. Sally and I are still seeing our therapists, and our PTSD is gradually improving. We've managed to desensitize ourselves to the idea of Tom Wilson. It's not perfect, but we've made good progress. We're still triggered by thoughts of him sometimes, but now it's more of an annoyance than something that overwhelms us. When Sally thinks of him now, she no longer sees him as a powerful figure who hurt her. Instead, she sees him as a pathetic, insignificant person, a figure of ridicule. I've started a company based on my Enos technology, which I've licensed to industries like animal husbandry, medical diagnostics, and law enforcement. The royalties have already helped us pay off our mortgage and Sally's medical school debts. Next on our list are some exotic trips, and hopefully, starting a family. Do we still use the Enos at home? Yes, but just for fun. This whole experience has deepened our appreciation for trust and transparency in our marriage. If I want something, I just ask Sally. If she has work issues, she tells me. We won't be using the Enos for any personal matters again. The playful word games at the heart of our relationship are back in full swing. Some of our friends might find our jokes about difficult times disturbing, but to us, it's a sign of our strength and mental health, and that our close bond is here to stay. Whenever we start to slip, it's therapeutic to indulge in a little more pun-based humor, especially when poking fun at Tom Wilson. And yes, we've resumed being intimate. It started slowly, but it's been wonderful. One memorable night, we had dinner at one of our favorite Mexican restaurants. Sally had her usual combination platter and, of course, several shots of El Muerto hot sauce. Sally says there's no scientific proof that capsaicin is an aphrodisiac, but it certainly seems to get her in the mood. I have no complaints about that, but I did express concern about the after effects of all that hot sauce on her lips. Fortunately, her dinner only stoked her passions, not any discomfort. Our intimacy was passionate, but no discomfort came from the meal itself. The AI might have been out of our lives, but the passion was definitely there. We cuddled afterward and fell back into our usual pun-filled banter, joking about Tom Wilson. Wow, you really shocked him there? Honey, I did major damage to his ego. You've invented a new sport, pole vaulting. His pole was revolting, so I zapped him again. Did you fry his pride in a jiffy? Hell, I blasted his bravado all the way to Wisconsin. Game, set, and match to Sally. Again. I've learned that the only way I can win a pun battle with her is to get creative with my responses. That usually levels the playing field, at least for a little while. But then my brilliant wife's mind resets, and I'm back to being the underdog. Mexican food really is a gift that keeps on giving. As we lay there in our post-meal, post-pun bliss, Sally let out a massive Richter scale 6.0 fart. The Enos by the bed went crazy, recorded a new high score, and then settled back down. I raised an eyebrow at her. Wow, that was impressive. Still feeling fond of him? In her best Monty Python French accent, she curled her lip and said, I fart in his general direction. Romantic, right? Well, all I care about is that my sweet canary is back, singing in the mines again. It might just be a fart to you, but to me, it's the Hallelujah chorus.